It still feels like it's there almost, as opposed to started.
Chuck Bush.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Brian Smiley.
Nice to meet you. Okay. Can you hear me?
It's pretty fun.
Okay. Yes. Can you hear me? A little louder. Good morning, everybody. A little more. A little more. Give me a little more. Because I'm not going to spend an hour and a half like this. Half plank, yeah? The core. Working on the core. Good morning and welcome to this panel, Investment and Funding of Indie Film and TV, from theatrical features to cable networks, Netflix, and Amazon. This is the longest panel title I've seen, but hopefully it will be interesting. My name is René Bordage. I'm a CEO of Elevado Media. I'll be your moderator today. Just for context, I'm an executive consultant in media and entertainment and licensing and financing distribution. I'm also executive producer of some TV and film projects. But I think I'm here because I wrote a book on film financing a year ago, and it was the first book written for investors, but most importantly, it allowed me to become friends with some of the smart people around this table. And today I'm glad that we are able to hear from them about their great experience. Micah Green from CAA, Brian Smiley from New Regency, Chuck Bush Jr. from Great Road Capital, Aaron Mayerson from Qualia Legacy Advisors, and Matt Bacall from Lionsgate Entertainment. Before I go into a couple of slides, introductory slides, I'd like to know from the audience who are part of our industry. So are there producers today in the audience? Wow, a lot of in film or TV? Film first? Both? TV? Writers, maybe? It always starts with a good story. Actors, distributors, and financiers. So they're all here. Okay, let's go with a couple of slides that I put together. This is from MPAA. It just shows that the worldwide box office revenues have literally doubled in the last decade. You know, we spend a lot of time analyzing year-to-year variances, but worldwide box office is still very robust. Film is recession-proof and also uncorrelated to equities and bonds, and that's often a reason why some high net worth individuals look for investment in media and entertainment as a part of their alternative class of assets. Overall, film entertainment is expected to grow significantly. As you can see here from PwC film entertainment aggregate growth from 91 billion in 2014 to 110 billion in 2018. They mentioned OTT, over-the-top services, as being in 2014 to 33 billion in 2018. And VR, just a slide to show that VR also is promising to be an area of growth, and you know that there are many panels in this conference. Forecast 150 billion market into 2020. Just for context for all the financing. So without further ado, I'll ask my colleagues to introduce themselves and to give us a brief overview of what they do in film financing and media financing, and we'll go with questions. We will keep time also at the end for questions from the audience, but if I see you raise your hands, I'll try to integrate your questions as we go along. All right. Micah, would you start, please, for us?
Sure. So I co-run the film finance group at CAA, and in essence what we do is serve as intermediaries or facilitators between the finance and distribution communities, really independent and studio, and talent. And the mission for our department, there's 12 of us now, is frankly to get as many good movies made each year as we can, because unlike, say, 10 years ago, we just don't, as an agency, we don't believe that we can rely upon the studio infrastructure to develop, finance, and ultimately release enough quality movies to keep the business healthy, let alone to keep our talent working. So that's sort of the spirit of what we do. The day-to-day of it is primarily film packaging, meaning working on behalf of a project, usually that starts at script stage, but sometimes before, and advocate for that project to pull together high-end elements, director, cast, producer, if there is not already a producer. Then work as a financing agent and figure out the right way to finance that movie, convince the right types of financiers to actually do it. And we act as advisors to a large number of film investors. We can talk about that later. So get those movies financed, and then also oversee the distribution of those movies, which largely means licensing, selling those now what are packaged projects and finance projects, selling them into the studio system, studio or independent distributors, and overseeing the release of those movies. And we do that these days for about 50 movies a year that we, as an agency, we package and finance and sell. And we also act as a third-party sales agent for another 30 or 40 movies a year. So these are movies that we didn't play a role in creating. We're just coming on board to help them find the best possible distribution. So it's a really big volume of movies. One thing to note is that, again, I've been at the agency for 10 years. And at the time that I came over, independent film meant to them and to much of Hollywood art film and what I'd call marginal movies, meaning movies that felt like they probably didn't have commercial viability or they were not going to be Academy level creatively. And so therefore studios and the sort of Hollywood establishment financing and distribution companies didn't want them. And that's frankly what independent film was. And when good movies got made independently, it was always sort of a miracle when movies screened at a film festival and were well received. It felt like they were needles in a haystack that had been discovered. And that isn't the business today. We've sort of pushed really hard to turn the independent business into a high level, creatively strong and commercially viable business. So today, many of the Academy nominated movies each year, in fact, I'd say an overwhelming majority, tend to be independently financed. Many high-end commercial, what people think of as franchise movies, those are independently financed. And many movies that are ultimately fully financed by studios and released by studios actually begin life as independent packages, and the studios compete to finance them as opposed to having those projects developed inside the studio system. They're sort of bought by the studios just as they're about to go into production. We'll get into examples, I'm sure, later, but that's what I do.
Brian? Thank you.
So my name is Brian Smiley. I actually work at Fox Digital Entertainment now.
Okay.
In Fox Digital Studios, we are developing and producing lower budget films for direct to digital distribution. I focus primarily on marketing and distribution of those films.
Chuck?
Great. I'm Chuck Bush from Great Road Capital. Great Road Capital is a boutique investment bank focused on really the segment of technology, media, telecom that I call the content, really the content side of it, content production financing, the financing of the distribution of content, so P&A and other mechanisms, and content enabling technology, so which covers a broad range of technologies that are really transforming the industry, obviously. So we raise capital for companies, for individual projects, and for funds. And we also have our own funds that we're forming. So we're really playing all along the financing spectrum, small projects to large projects in film, the medium formerly known as television, serialized content, and in some cases virtual reality.
Thank you. Aaron?
Hi, I'm Aaron Meyerson. I'm a managing director at Qualia Legacy Advisors. We also are a boutique investment bank focused on media and entertainment. We We're active in film, television, music, digital, and related businesses. We do private placements of debt and equity, mergers and acquisitions, financial advisory, and consulting. We don't raise money for individual films, so we're not the company to come to if you are looking to do that. We really focus on our clients are companies or funds. We put together, financing for independent producers, but again, it's at the company level or fund level. Our firm's a little different, and we also, many of us have operating experience in the media industry, so we do consulting for our clients. Our clients generally are companies in this of revenues between $10 and $100 million, and we'll roll up our sleeves and get in there. My background, I was, previously president of programming and development at CBS. I ran programming for the Oxygen Network and West Coast programming for MTV. And before that was at Fox, so that's sort of typical. And before that, I was in the film side as an executive at New Line. So that's kind of typical of our company, that we combine operating experience with banking experience to help the clients.
Matt, to you.
Hello. So I am one of the heads of corporate strategy and business development at Lionsgate Entertainment. I've had the privilege of doing deals with some folks at this table, Micah and Chuck. My sort of role at Lionsgate's changed over the years. I was CFO and COO of a company we owned called Mandate Pictures. Mandate Pictures was purchased by Lionsgate in 2007. And the company made everything from Juno to the Harold and Kumar movies to This Is the End, and then the last company affiliated with that brand was a movie called Neighbors that came out a couple summers ago now, and the company was spun off into a new company called Good Universe, which is still up and running. But Lionsgate, as Mike alluded to, has played in all these areas, and I would have said it was a pretty, it is an independent company. In many ways, it is still probably, I don't know, the biggest of the small guys or the smallest of the big guys, depending on how you look at things. But, a few years ago, it was a very different company. But then along came Mad Men, Weeds, Nashville, Orange is the New Black on the TV side, and on the feature side, of course, Hunger Games. But prior to that, most of the hits were sort of onesies, twosies, from Monsters Ball to the Saw franchise to Tyler Perry's Slate. So definitely a company with deep indie roots, and the company still distributes either digitally or day and date, digitally and theatrically, on various platforms. Lots of movies per year that are not, some are hopefully big blockbusters, but the business model is set up to do lots of smaller fare as well, and in aggregate to make a business out of that library. So I will pause there. Lots to discuss.
Yes.
Actually, our company was found by selling to Lionsgate. We were Artisan.
Yes.
Sold our
So you got
library
seed
to
money from
Lionsgate.
There you go. So we're making deals right here.
Okay, my first question, I think there's two, but that's the first official question, would be, we all know about the proliferation of new platforms, the over-the-top services, the growth of international box office, a more stable domestic box office. Big studios, not investing as much in development of smaller films, being more focused on tentpoles and big franchisable content. We see how it can be very successful even for smaller distributors. Where do you think the investors are looking to deploy capital right now? Who wants to start that question, answering that question? Where do you think the money is attracted to right now?
Well,
Chuck?
I'll start with what we're seeing is a wide array of investors, from high net worth individuals, family offices, who are kind of the traditional investors in entertainment, to institutions who are looking for opportunities to invest and take advantage of the upside potential while also protecting on the downside. So some of the types of deals we're seeing are P&A financing, The more the studios focus on the tent poles that they finance or co-finance with large co-financing entities, the less they're financing the P&A, the marketing dollars on films. And so we're raising a fund for P&A, and some of the larger players in that space over the last few years have pulled back, but there will continue to be opportunities there. So the other areas that we're seeing for sources of capital are international sources of capital, China, and yes, there is real money flowing in from China, not just fake money, and the large entities like LaVision and Tencent and Wanda are all very aggressive in terms of building their profile in the U.S. And actually other places in Asia, Korea and Japan, are looking for investment or are investing in U.S. or North American content. So so that's kind of the opportunity in terms of where investor capital is coming from, and then what they're investing in is a combination of, again, lower risk activities such as P&A, television or serialized content, and figuring out those various business models. And I think there's a huge opportunity there, whether you're looking at VOD, ad-driven entertainment, or subscription entertainment. Those are all for serialized content and for independent film key areas where investors are looking to put their capital.
Aaron, would you say that it's the same reading that you have about where the money is interested to go right now? People want to invest?
Well, I think there's so much change right now. I don't know how it's going to settle out. I do think there's going to be a lot of opportunity to invest in the TV sector. The kind of traditional network studio model is cracked, and it's that's going to accelerate very quickly. And with all the new distribution platforms out there, I think there's going to be a lot of new models for financing independent television, which there never were in the past. There was really no such thing as independent TV finance, because of the capital involved in putting series on the air and deficit financing. It was really a closed business where studios were, a handful of studios were selling to a handful of networks. And I think with all the new distribution, the digital platforms, there's going to be a lot of new models that develop that are co-financings with international players, and then allow independent financiers to spring up in TV for the first time. So I think that's going to be exciting.
Micah, I have a question for you related to that. Do you feel that one-off indie films are harder to finance as we move forward, or is it easier? What is your reading on that? Because I know you touch a lot of projects at CA. So
I think it's much easier, but that doesn't mean it's easy. But I would say it's easier than I remember it being, honestly, ever, for as long as I've been in the business. I do think there are a lot of businesses within just the movie side of the business. There are a lot of movie businesses, and people who get frustrated and find it hard to make progress with their project. There are one of two things is happening. One, they have something that's weak and they don't realize it. The script isn't actually that strong, or the book they're trying to develop isn't actually that compelling, or the filmmaker they've attached to their project doesn't have enough body work to demonstrate real talent. So that can be happening. Or they may not understand the market their project needs to live in. So I try to encourage everybody, including at our place, the very biggest stars and the biggest producers, to think of everything they're putting together as an independent project, and to be able to justify its existence on economic terms. So if you're trying to make a movie, and let's say, for example, you have just the script, if the only way you can justify financing that movie is that it's so good it should attract Brad Pitt, and then it will be commercial because it has Brad Pitt, then you have a flawed business plan for your movie. What you should be able to do is sit down, taking some education from panels and honestly reading you can get in a day for free on the internet. You should be able to break down a pretty simple business model for your movie and understand, are there a number of actors that could play the roles in this project and might actually do it based on, for example, the level of director you have or think you can get, that you could justify a budget that you can actually shoot that movie for using a traditional, let's say, foreign pre-sale model of financing. Most movies that we see getting made, that's where they began. They began with a simple business plan that says, this script can be shot in XYZ location, I can get a rebate back by shooting in that location, that's going to leave X amount of money that I need to make the movie, and I'll have to recoup through its distribution. And they come up with a plan. If I have, any one of these 15 actors, I should be able to pre-sell the foreign rights to the movie and cover a majority of the budget that way. And once they do that, then the exercise for how they get the movie made is pretty clear. It's about casting your movie. You have to get a certain level of actor. But people who sort of play by those rules these days get, I think, far more done, more movies made than they would have a few years ago. A few years ago, the process was just knock on doors and kind of pray that the thing you had suited the unknown business model of the person you were dealing with. I feel like more and more today the business models are pretty clear, and there's a few of them. And as I said, if you understand what you have, if you have a low-budget comedy, a very domestic, language-based, not physical comedy, language-based domestic comedy, the kind of movie you would shoot for a couple $1 million. There are few places to go to. As I say, you can Google it. Few places whose business plan is to make those kinds of properties. So if you're focused about what you have and you're pursuing the right potential partners, I can't remember a better time.
Story, audience, profitability, it all goes together. If you don't have an audience, you don't have distribution. If you don't have a story, you don't even have a project. And profitability is, at what price can you make that film that you can expect a reasonable profit?
Yeah, to pick up on something, I don't know if it was the exact question, but Michael was saying, at Mandate, we did about 5 films a year. We would always have the A plan, the B plan, and the C plan. And, A, if we get George Clooney, great, fantastic, right? That's not really much of a plan because he's a pretty busy guy. What happens if we don't have it? And then going down the line again, we had our own foreign sales team, so that's a benefit, but there's lots of foreign sales teams who will take on a worthy project, and they would give us estimates, and we would do pre-sales, and we would look. And if the pre-sales weren't at the level that we wanted them to be at, we would reduce the budget of the movie to bring it back into line where it could be profitable for us. So I'm happy to say every single movie we made at Mandate, so this is, there's probably a record of this somewhere, but you can look it up. Every single movie we made was profitable. But it was profitable not because every single movie succeeded so well. It was profitable because we had a lot of downside scenarios where we could get out of the movie profitably if it didn't work out very well. And we had some that were great, and we had some that were not so great. But in every case, we were able to eke out some amount of profit for our investors, independent or Lionsgate's investment dollars.
That's a great point. I think just to jump on that is when we're looking at companies or projects to finance, a lot of times it's about the structure of the deal. And the structure of the deal for the investors is not going to be transparent necessarily to the public. So you can have a film that doesn't perform on box office. You might have a lot of trouble finding data on VOD performance, but because of pre-sales, tax credits, and other sources of capital, the film can be off risk completely before its domestic release. So that structuring of the deal and the financing becomes really important, especially in this environment where, yes, it's a great time to be out there looking for capital for projects, but there are more and more projects and companies looking for capital.
I think that, just to add to that, the general point is your business plan for your project can't be, this movie's going to be great. You shouldn't be going into it unless you do think it's going to be great, but it's hard to make a great movie. It really is. And so an investor's probably going to back it because they think it might be great, but they want to know, okay, in case it doesn't turn out to be great, in case it turns out to be pretty good or even mediocre, what elements have you packaged that enable us to maybe still make money or at least get our money back in terms of actors, in terms of your genre, in terms of your potentially pre-sales, and what that relationship is to your budget. Does it make sense, assuming that it might not be great? Because again, it's hard to make a great movie.
So I think off the package point, I mean, at Fox, we're looking at much lower budget films, kind of the $1 million price point, but we are looking for packages that have elements, whether it's cast or directors, that have built-in audiences. So one thing a lot of people are doing around this town are they're finding big social media influencers, whether they're directors or talent. And for us, that makes a lot of sense if they have a big following that we can convert to transactions. And I think for independent filmmakers, if you're able to bring those elements into your package, maybe they're not, Brad Pitt, but maybe someone like a PewDiePie or a King Batch, on the low budget direct-to-digital front, it makes a lot of sense to finance those type of projects.
Does analytic play a role in your assessment as investors or partner in a project? Do you see, because we see obviously that OTT have raised the bar on analytics and other tech companies as well. How is it impacting the indie film and TV business? Do you use these tools to be able to show your potential partners exactly what the audience is or the behavior expected from the audience?
For us, it's everything. I mean, we're dealing with digital talent, and the good part about digital talent is they know where their audience is. They can tell you which countries they come from. They can tell you, in some cases, even the zip codes. So, as we look to kind of perfect the distribution model for these properties, it helps a lot to understand from an analytics standpoint where the audience is coming from and ultimately where we need to open the film at, theatrically or direct to digital. And you can do that today with the right kind of analytics that you couldn't do 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago.
I'd say one additional thing, just the question that was on the board originally, we might have veered off a little, but virtual reality, you say there's other panels and probably people more qualified to speak on the subject than I, although we have invested in some good VR content at Lionsgate. It is a huge boom right now. So for anyone in the room who is interested in that path of storytelling, there are very few people out there who are doing it, very, very, very few who are doing it well, and a lot of need for content in that space. So if you are someone who's attracted to that, I would say run fast in that direction, because in the next few years, there's only going to be more opportunity there.
Thank you for that. Next question. We have a lot of people involved in production in the room. What's the single biggest mistake producers make when pitching projects to investors? Can you give us a sense what not to do?
I've got one, just to follow up on what was said earlier. But all the time you see business plans that say, this movie is going to be Juno, right? So Mandate made Juno. It's a great movie. There were a lot of great people involved. Fox was amazing on the distribution end. And also, it was a lot of luck, because we would not have sold the movie to Fox had we thought it was going to be the movie it became, right? So to come out with some sort of very small set and say, this is going to be the next Saw, this is going to be the next Blair Witch, this is going to be the next Juno, or what have you, Little Miss Sunshine, like those are the lottery tickets. So you need to have a broader view of the marketplace and how to get out if it is not a crazy success.
Yeah, this is one of the areas where analytics could come in really handy. I mean, your comparable, if your comparable films, if they include My Big Fat Greek Wedding or Blair Witch, usually those go right. Yeah, those go right into the circular file, and so. You really have to think about what your comparable projects are. You have to look at it, cut the data lots of different ways, and then also sort of on the data analytics point, understand who the audience can be for the project, and that's got to be so. Not identifying the audience is a big mistake producers make in their business plan, and not identifying the true comparable projects, and really knowing on what basis they're comparable. Comparables can be, genre, budget, tone, actors, and other talent, and you really have to look at your project in a very realistic way from all those different perspectives.
I'd say on the TV side, the biggest mistake is thinking you can just sell an idea or concept. You really can't. I mean, if you're talking about the unscripted world, you could maybe 10 years ago, you could go in and sell Survivor on an idea. Right now, that's not possible. You need to go in with one of two things, either talent or unique access, because ideas tend to be a dime a dozen, and the idea that you think is unique has been pitched many, many times before, so you really need to come in with something that's proprietary. And on the scripted side, it's really about not so much the idea either, but it's really about the writer, because unlike a movie, a TV show is going to exist, week after week and potentially season after season. So the buyer wants to know that there's someone who can execute on that story and characters over a prolonged period of time.
What about log lines? Because I find personally that this is one of the biggest mistakes I've seen. People cannot explain what their project is about in one or two sentences. Do you see that happening to you, or am I the only one seeing that?
No, that's true. I mean, you need to have a crisp logline or elevator pitch. If you think your movie or TV show is too complicated or too abstract for that, then it's probably not a well-formed idea.
You mentioned comparables. I see sometimes comparables that are 10 years old. What do you think? What is your trigger for looking at a decent comparable for a project that you considering?
10 months.
10 months?
No,
that's the short.
Yeah, that's not short. Yeah, I mean, look, the business has changed so radically in the last 1, 2, 3 years. Really, anything that's older than 3 to 5 years doesn't make sense. If you go out 5 years, you might make adjustments for things like inflation and kind of the business model from 5 years ago, which was still more dependent on DVD than VOD. The way that pay TV deals have really cratered in the last 5 to 7 years has to be taken into account, and to some extent that's being replaced by subscription VOD and other VOD platforms, but not fully. So yeah, I mean it's sort of a 3 to 5 year range in my mind.
Okay. What about the OTT services? How do you deal with these new platforms? And do you think they will become an obstacle to theatrical release for films? We see that there's a pressure on the theatrical windows. We have some day and date release with limited platform or limited release of a limited theatrical release and OTT release. Do you think that's going to expand, or that's just a trial that we're seeing right now? Nobody has.
I mean, for small movies, I'd say it is becoming, it is possible to do in a very sort of productive, financially rewarding way. Lionsgate does it sometimes, Margin Call or Arbitrage. There's movies that fit that model, but I think it is again, depending how indie you're going. You look at what's happened with Paranormal Activity, which. Again, I don't know what's for the record here, but seems to have been a mistake. They tried to go day and date with it, and the big chains froze them out, and it will not make as much money as it would have had they respected the theatrical window. There's still a lot of power in that theatrical window for the downstream revenue sources, including VOD and pay TV, et cetera. So I don't think the theatrical window is going anywhere, but for certain movies it makes sense to day and date, certainly on a worldwide basis where there's a lot of variability and less screens per capita, et cetera.
Okay.
If I could speak to that a sec, certainly I think it's the case that most people experimenting, so to speak, with these platforms, day and date releases or digital first, they're not doing it by choice. This is what you look at when you can't get a significant traditional theatrical release. And if and when there are some examples of studios or filmmakers selecting a day-and-date release or direct-to-home entertainment in lieu of traditional theatrical and really thriving through that release pattern, it may change the business in a much more profound way. Right now, when you see success stories, I mean, for every success story I've seen of these day-and-date releases, I've had conversations with the filmmakers where they regret the path and they wish they had had the choice of a traditional theatrical. I wonder, with Beasts of No Nation, I wonder if this is the outcome that the filmmakers wanted, or if everybody's sort of trying to make the most of the opportunities available to them. So, fortunately, it is an alternative. Again, several years ago, not 10 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, if you couldn't secure a meaningful theatrical release, you weren't going to get meaningful distribution at all. You weren't going to be in Walmart. There wasn't going to be a significant physical distribution for your movie, and there weren't an array of digital platforms that were making your movie available to home entertainment. So at least now, it's not all or nothing, and there are a variety of ways to get your movie out, even if you can't sell to a studio or a major independent in a traditional window. But it's not, to me, it doesn't actually feel like it's a big threat. What's happening digitally with home entertainment, these are small shots. You don't see, most people are still pursuing traditional theatrical, and I don't see that trend changing anytime soon.
Although I think, from a cultural standpoint, what worries me a little bit is that this millennial generation is going to the movies is not a habit like it has been for previous generations, and I think when that habit's lost, that isn't good for the theatrical window.
I can speak to this point because we're doing films starring millennials, geared towards millennials, and theatrical for that audience is not as important as it is for other audiences. I think we are definitely spending in a controlled way. But we feel like we can go direct to digital and still, make profit and still reach the audience we're trying to go after. And I think for independents, it provides another opportunity if, in fact, that those are the consumption habits of your audience that you're going for.
To that effect, I encourage people to look up on the internet the Deloitte Digital Democracy Study, where they really explain the behavior of millennials, and they actually started separating the leading millennials from the trailing millennials, and you see that within that group there are really big differences. For instance, the younger millennials think that there's more value to their cell phone than a flat screen, so that tells you what type of device they like to enjoy their stories on.
If I could just throw in one quick point on that, I think that because of the position the major studios have taken, focusing on tent poles, and so there are kind of two things happening. One is that there are theatrical slots available for films in those distributors' pipelines, but there are more and more films competing for those slots. I guess the second point is that up until 2005 or so, there was a viable direct-to-video, direct-to-DVD market, and then DVD started tanking for various reasons. I think we're back into a situation where, for the right budget, a film can go direct to VOD, as Brian is working on, and even films that are larger budget can do a limited release with a VOD release and still be profitable for their equity investors. So it's really, kind of, if you're going straight to DVD, straight to VOD, I think it's a matter of finding the right budget and the right film. I mean, I think, look, if you look at dramas and comedies that are lower budget, maybe 20 million and below, some of those just aren't going to find a theatrical release. They're just not. So there is a range there where you can, where VOD and other platforms are viable for the investor and for the producer.
If a project comes with P&A money, I guess it gives you an edge when you want to secure that slot on the theatrical window. So having P&A attached to your project is probably something that again, you only get P&A if you can prove that you have an audience. So back to Micah's point, if you start on the right foot with a good story that deserves to be told, with a very clear measurable audience and a budget that is reasonable enough to expect profitability, then maybe you can attract a P&A fund who say, oh, interesting, we know that there's an appetite for distribution. As Chuck mentioned, there are a lot of movies to be shown every week in theaters. The pipeline needs to be filled. Next question was, what's the best approach to secure first money in a project? What kind of project would interest investors to put money as development money, which seems to be the hardest money to get? What kind of stories do you think people will want to develop and put money behind?
You mean for a pitch, like attracting an investment to pay a writer?
Yes, because you mentioned that the studios have changed their model where now they pick up a lot of projects that are already developed that are not developed by the studio system. So there needs to be development money in the independent space. How do you access that money, and what kind of project is more likely to attract some development money? So I'm thinking about producers in the room that may need assistance on development.
I mean, this will be my answer for every area of financing, raising financing, but I would argue that it's talent-driven, meaning it's great if you believe you have a good idea, something you'd like to develop, but who the writer is going to be the key to whether you're going to attract at least educated money to pay for development or not. And if you're talking about developing this idea, or again, maybe it's underlying rights, you've got the life rights to somebody, developing it with a writer who's unproven, then you're going to have a really hard time raising money from established film investors. It doesn't mean you can't convince a wealthy friend to invest in it, but if you're looking to traditional film financiers, they're evaluating the track record and the caliber of the talent. So in this case, the writer.
And the reason for that, I assume, is that a lot of development is not as efficient as it could be because it's not the right writer for the right project. So savvy investors know about these things because they have experience. So they try to lower their risk by having the best talent attached to the project early on. Other comments on that?
I mean, I would just second that. Again, we're going for a different audience, but it's all about the package that comes in the door. Who's attached to star in it, who is directing it, and obviously the writer is less important for us, but more, what vehicle can we create around the star that they're bringing in the door. So it's the talent still.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I'd add to that to say, if you have something that takes a lot of development money, you've set yourself up for a big challenge. So be the writer yourself, partner up with a writer, come up with the business plan, come up with the pitch book that is fulsome, get the underlying rights. You can option lots of comic books and books for $1 up front if you're a good negotiator. So, the bigger the packages that you come in with, that will help you. So if you sort of like, I think I have this idea and I need money for it, it will not happen.
Distribution. If you don't have distribution, you don't have much. Where do you see that evolving in the next 3 years? Do you see consolidation in the market? Any trends that you can identify for the audience?
Well, I mean, obviously we're in an era where distribution is becoming more commoditized, content is king. The TV, the traditional TV bundle is breaking apart with all the new OTT and digital platforms. But I think, there's a feeling that people don't want to subscribe to 10 or 15 different subscription services. So at some point there'll be a new kind of aggregator that's going to aggregate all these digital platforms. That might be Apple, that might be Samsung, it might be, someone who's got your eyeball when you first turn on your television. But I think ultimately there will be a rebundling of TV channels into some kind of a smart dynamic bundle that replaces the bundle we have right now. So I think that's probably where TV distribution is headed.
Well, I mean, one exciting thing, and again, if you're in this room, you probably know of them, but if you don't, between Netflix and Amazon, whose appetite for content only grows by the day, find them, make friends with them. I would say, there's Broad Green, there's A24 out of New York. Again, if you don't know those companies, they are spending money on smaller tier distribution and doing a great job at it. So I think there's a lot of companies that you look out there saying, Lionsgate still does some of that, but has grown up in many ways. But there's like a new raft of companies who are willing to support films that are sort of, let's say, lower cost, independent fare in meaningful ways.
I have a question that I didn't put on the screen. If you had to create a fund today, let's say an investor comes to you with $250 million to say, I want to play actively in that space, I want my capital to be somewhat preserved, and I want a reasonable return, where would you look first for opportunities? Let's start with Chuck.
First of all, when
you
it comes to
mentioned P&A first of all.
Yeah, well, right. I'll skip ahead. I think a point was made earlier about, excuse me, the fact that projects need to be packaged, right? And you asked a question about development. So we historically have not financed or brought financing to anything that wasn't already packaged. So development is certainly an area that we tend to avoid, or if you're looking at a $250 million fund, I'd probably make it an opportunistic fund financing a series of independently financed, independently produced films that have something. They have a completed script, some talent attached, they have international potential, and some other capital sources such as tax credits and possibly pre-sales and maybe even some equity. So a fund that wants to protect its downside risk should be focused on projects where some of the riskiest part is sort of taken out, and that riskiest aspect would be development. I think as a fund grows, if you're on your second fund, or maybe even in that fund, you can carve out a very small pocket for development. But development takes, if you have a book, development takes 4 to 40 years to get from concept to screen, right? So I think Spielberg was working on a Lincoln biopic for 15 years before Doris Kearns Goodwin's book came out, and then 4 years later they made Lincoln, which is more based on a team of rivals than any other of the 1,000 Lincoln biographies out there. So the other piece I would say is P&A is really attractive to investors, and so if you're kind of financing independent films through your fund and also bringing the P&A, then you have a lot better shot at getting outsized returns and protecting yourself on the downside. And I guess the last thing I'd say is that the funds that are getting, we've kind of seen, I think, the last round of funds and companies financed by a former studio head and built around that person. I think it's not good enough to say that that this guy usually was around at a time when the studio was very successful. So there's been a round of very successful studio execs who've gotten capital, but I think that model for a fund is changing. I think it needs to have some other aspect to it, whether it's more sophisticated data analytics to identify projects and trends and opportunities, or a mix of feature film content and serialized content, but kind of the idea that, Studio 8 is a great example, great company, great potential, but there just won't be a lot of Jeff Robinovs out there in the future who can bring in $400 million from various sources and finance a fund. I don't believe that model will continue, but it's historically been the model for the most successful funds.
Because the world has changed, so the studio model is not the model that you can implement in a new fund, and we see how many transactions we need to complete the financing of an indie film.
Right, and it's becoming harder and harder to attribute the success of studio to one person.
Yes, good point.
Here's a real practical thing you can do. There's a daily blast website called Video Inc. Go to videoinc.com. Every day it tells you the new players who are financing new production. I don't know if you want to call it film or TV. I don't know what the differentiating point is anymore. It's online video, and literally there's a new player every day that's doing original programming. That's where you can find that information.
Other questions? I like to have this question asked to my panelists. Would you share a lesson you've learned the hard way with the audience on a more personal level, but related obviously to to film and TV? Something that would be a lesson that we can all benefit from.
Well, I'll go. I mean, I think
Brian.
if you can, one thing I learned, I don't know if I learned it the hard way, but I learned it, really quickly. This industry is about relationships, so the sooner you can start making those relationships and maintaining them, I think the better off you'll be. You never know when that person may be able to help you in the near future, and I think a lot of it is just about having the biggest possible network base.
I'm going to go out on a limb here, but I suspect that Micah and Matt have experienced this on some level, is beware the fake investor. You really have to do your due diligence on people who say they have capital, because there are people who will literally hire the fanciest lawyers at Loeb & Loeb and O'Melveny to do paperwork and draw up documents, and you'll get to the day where the wire's coming, and you call them and they say, oh, it didn't come yet, and oh, let me get the confirmation information for you, and then they disappear. I mean, I know many people at the highest levels of entertainment to whom this has happened, and I'll admit that it's happened to me. Hopefully, Micah and Matt will admit to at least being aware of these, but they're out there.
I live through that every day. But this isn't really an answer to this, but it may be a time to share just one lesson you don't need to learn. Just believe me when I tell you this, so you don't waste time chasing it. But a lot of people spend their time on their projects they're trying to put together, putting what they think is putting together the financing. And lots of calls and meetings and deals sometimes. They believe they've lined up the financing for the movie, and all they need is the talent. And they then show up at the talent agency and say, I have my project, it's fully financed, with elaborate structure sometimes, and we want to make offers to your talent. And what we'll say is, we don't believe you're financing, and we honestly don't even care whether you have it or not. That's really not how the process works. It's about really strong creative, the material, the rights, the script, if you're a director, having a body of work that's really strong. And that's all we're looking at. And it's really all the talent is looking at. Is it creatively worthwhile? If it is, people like me will wind up getting sucked into your project, and we will figure out the financing part. And we will figure it out. If it's strong enough to attract high-end talent, and I don't mean super famous talent, it could just be really strong talent, a great emerging director coming out of a film school. They've made a short film. It's brilliant. This is going to be their first feature. The budget is sane. It's not $20 million. It's $1 million, or it's $500,000. The money will come. It's not the thing we're all worried about. I mean, this is like the financing panel, but there's plenty of money. The hard part is aligning these elements. A bunch of us mentioned sort of packages and packaging. So the battle to fight, if you're a producer trying to get your movie made, is getting whatever you have into such strong shape and figuring out how to present it in the most compelling way so you can start assembling elements, meaning director, cast, and everything else. It will come into place. I haven't found yet the really great project that is packaged that can't find money. That isn't what happens. If you're not finding the money, it's because there's something wrong. You don't actually have the right star, big enough star, or your budget's too high. There's a ton of money out there waiting for these packages to sort of coalesce on their own.
Yeah, I'll just add to that because I think it's building on what Mike had said before too. The idea that, does the cream always rise to the top? I don't know. A lot of times, yes, and so I'd say listen to people. They are willing to tell you what they think. It might not always be what you think, but if enough people are saying the script's too weak, it's probably too weak. There's lots of people. UCA, for example, I don't know how many hundreds of assistants are employed there, but there's lots of incentive for all of those people to find the next great thing. So if there's no one that you can find to think your thing is the next great thing, it probably is not. It doesn't mean you don't have a good idea. It doesn't mean there's not something that can't be reworked into something great. It just means that right now it's not great. So listen, take that advice, and retool.
Wait, can I give you, this is a good opportunity too to mention, don't underestimate the power of assistants, period, at talent agencies and production companies, and the voice they have today is often really loud, and they are the ones who champion projects that wind up getting cast, made, bought, and distributed.
Everything at Lionsgate is read by an assistant before it gets to anybody else. Doesn't matter how high it is, really. It gets read and covered by someone, so they can start the process for you.
Yeah, and they will be, and many of them will be senior executives in a blink of an eye. And so making those relationships as early as you can, really getting to, I was impressed by the people who, when they're calling me, befriend my assistant, because those projects, those things start to become priorities in my world. Because if my assistant believes in them, then she adopts them, she makes them part of our agenda. And again, it's like you could learn it the hard way by being rude to assistants, or taking them for granted, and you'll read about them in 3 years when they're a VP at the studio you're trying to get a meeting with. So trust me, that happens.
Aaron, you have a lesson for us?
There's been many, but none I'm going to share right now.
We have time for questions from the audience. So
I know you mentioned virtual reality. That's the industry that I work in, and I'm really interested around the way that you guys are looking at distribution and monetization, because there's no real clear-cut strategy. So when people come in and pitch you, what are they saying? What's the biggest thing to you? What would incentivize you to actually say yes to financing?
Great question. Many layers there to unpack. But very briefly, what I'll say is, if it's based on some IP, like IP, the story, as these guys have mentioned before, is the most interesting thing, right? So if there's IP that can then live in other worlds, we own pieces of game companies where maybe it could be exploited if it's not VR itself, but it's AR or it's some other type of storytelling. I think that today, to your point, there's not a lot of pure VR monetization, so it has to be an investment that is of size that makes sense to grow IP that can live elsewhere. But there are lots of experiments being done, and so people are funding experiments now, not because the piece of VR itself is going to make a ton of money, but as a producer or director of VR content, it can still make you a good living.
You mentioned
Oh, sorry.
that companies that are run by former studio heads are maybe going to be a thing of the past. What about these new companies that are run by talent? I'm thinking of, say, Denver and Delilah, Charlize Theron. You don't have to address it specifically, but is that kind of company a good way to gain access?
For a producer looking for, in other words, for someone like you, would you look to a company like that to get access into financing and distribution?
Yeah.
Is that the question?
I'm a writer. I actually work for Canadian television, which we have a lot of development money, and we'll probably going to have more after yesterday's election.
Yes.
Which is huge. But we haven't had a terrific success rate in Canada, specifically with TV, even with Lionsgate, which originated as a Canadian company. So getting involved with, say, Denver and Delilah, is that a good way to go?
The way I would think of it, a lot of talent have production companies, and what's good about it is it can be a way to connect to that talent without having to go through an agency or a manager. Which isn't to say you shouldn't try through the agency or the manager, but if you're not getting traction there, it's another door in because someone else is answering the phone, and maybe they'll respond to your pitch better. But the idea that sort of specifically talent-driven production companies are a better way to get your project put together, I don't think is the way to look at it. I would say there are brands in production. There are producers who may not be known at a consumer level, but they're very well known at an industry level, and they are the ones whose calls get returned the quickest, and they're vouching for a project, often gets talent to consider it more strongly. So understanding and building a list of who are those people in the world of the kind of project you're making based on what you think the budget is and the material is. Some may be talent driven and others are probably not, but all of those people are good advocates. Really, when you're coming from outside the center of the business, you're trying to figure out a way to get traction for your idea. Often it's an established producer is the smartest thing you could do, is bringing someone like that on, either as a producing partner or as an executive producer, someone who's sort of a godfather, godmother figure for the movie. But their imprimatur, they're making a handful of phone calls can give you a lot of traction, because this is a relationship-driven business. We all get way too many submissions each week. We can't give a fair amount of attention to all of them, so we're going to prioritize the ones that have been vouched for by people we know.
Question, sir, in the front.
I want to know from the panel's perspective, with Strand Compton, The War Room, Perfect Guy, being big hit, Shondaland, ABC, Empire, has anyone from your perspective come up with an equity fund that would go just target minority films or multicultural films? Because now basically you have a huge rating artifice, and also you mentioned Beast of No Nation, great film. If that came out this year, it would have been a #1 film. It would even be, I think, even an Academy Award film. It's just a great film. But I don't see a coalition of people actually putting together any kind of funds to create these projects, kind of hodgepodge all over the place. Do you think that now is the time when people have seen the light, I guess I'm saying, in Hollywood, where they could actually say, you can actually go to investors and say, look, we just want $100 million for this, and we can create these type of projects on our own?
I can tell you that idea has come up. I've heard people talk about it, financiers and producers, every year since I've been doing this. And I think the reason I haven't seen it actually it's happened at a distributor level. There are distributors who've made sort of mandate to make more movies. But why I think you don't see it amongst financiers is because most independent finance is driven by its downside protection. It's not whether investors believe in the upside potential of those movies. It's how much of their investment are they getting back if the movie's not good. And when you're making movies that are foreign driven, you can pre-sell and cover through international sales the majority of your budget without regard to whether the movie is good and without regard to whether the movie is successful in the States. And if you're making urban films, you're not going to have a very significant foreign market. The market is domestic. So until there emerges a way to ensure the downside on those movies domestically, it's going to be harder to get them made with independent money. That could change with one entity. So, many of the independent financiers that are most known are backed by a single individual, and that individual has a creative or a social agenda, and they announce a company, and they don't go do a huge fundraise. They decide to commit their capital towards that film or television business. So one individual could suddenly change the trend, and we could see an entity exist that's making 3, 4, 5, 6 movies a year, and others sometimes find a way to follow suit. But I haven't seen it happen yet.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I know it's a goal of Charles King's company Macro. They have some financing. They're looking to do urban content at multiple or various budget levels. So it's a few people out there, I think.
Yeah, I would just say that well, one, the term urban is one from 1998. I know. I just want to throw that out there. I mean, look, these are multicultural films. The drivers of the viewers of films are the most avid viewers of film are African Americans and Latino audiences. And I think as far as international goes, it's always been my belief that there's always this concept that black films don't sell internationally, and I think that part of that is just the effort that and time that it takes to find where people who are interested in multicultural films are. So I think, it's a bit of laziness on the part of sales agents. I think you can probably go to parts of London, parts of Paris, and find the 20 theaters that have a multicultural audience. So I don't believe that internationally there's just no market for multicultural films. And I think that that we see examples of films that transcend, that have predominantly people of color in who are in the talent in the movies that transcend sort of the usual boxes that people put them in. So transcend the usual boxes that people put those films in. I mean, if a film has a person of color in one of the leads, it becomes an urban film. Therefore, it won't sell. So I think a lot of that kind of thinking is antiquated. I actually wrote the business plan for Charles King and Macro, and I think he's really probably the only person in Hollywood who is laser focused on the opportunities there and has the credibility, capital, and backing to do it.
Just before I go to this gentleman, it's interesting to know that the Census Bureau last report showed that the kids under age 5 in America are majoritarily from the minorities. So the world is changing right now, and I think these questions will certainly continue to be on the forefront. But it's interesting that the face of our country changes as well. I see you. I have this person in front of you, and
I wanted to piggyback on what you both were saying, because you having an accent, obviously all of us in this country came from somewhere else. So it's like you said, it's changing, but it's always been. Mm-hmm. So if we do the demographics on the world, we find out within the African diaspora there are over 1 billion, probably 1.3 billion people. So if we were going to do a breakdown based on race, which would be an old kind of way of thinking, you would see demographically that whether you're talking about people of European descent, African descent, Latino descent, we live in a multicultural world. And so it's a matter of looking at what we've seen in the past from India and China, these developing countries that as their economies grow, the entertainment sector grows in terms of that audience.
Yeah.
So what Mr. Bush is saying is that we also have to look at what the international projections are showing us in the moment as well. The Butler did better internationally than people would have expected. With regards to Mr. Green and CAA, the success of clients like Steve McQueen, and a film specifically like 12 Years a Slave, that film did tremendously internationally, better internationally than it did here. So that is a perfect example of a multicultural film in which you have a person of African descent as the lead character, and a story in which is centered around that type of person. However, you have a cast that's multicultural, and often in that case, in terms of the packaging, many of them Brits.
So when you're putting it together, you know, you can potentially get UK sales, and when, as we've seen in the past in the 60s, and I won't belabor this point too much more, but in the 60s you would see with action films, they would cast these multicultural casts with an Italian, with a German, and with an American.
We need to, sorry, I should interrupt. We have 2 questions and we have 2 minutes, so really quickly, madam.
I took a book from unpublished to published. I got it into development. It's a period piece around the Napoleonic era. I did coverage everywhere. But in the end, for various reasons, I did not go to camera. Lots of people like this picture. They called me up 10 months ago and said, oh, you know, Harvey and Bob invested in this Marco Polo, and you should be pitching your picture again because you can put it all over the world, and they can put the subtitles on for you in whatever language. But I want to know, before I use all of this sweat equity again, what you guys think of doing these kinds of 10-part series for distribution with Netflix, and what's the reality of getting $90 million, $9 million for, you know, each episode? Because it's a lot, from my point of view, I put my time in.
As a fan of historical epics, I would say that the emerging TV models are pretty exciting, with a sort of 6-8 episode kind of opportunity. So I'd say don't give up.
But if you're, if you're looking at a premium, you know, new premium digital player like Netflix or Amazon, they're focused on experienced talent that's attached. So it's not just about your story, but it's about who the filmmaker is. Well, that's not what I'm saying. You might, but what I'm saying is, like, House of Cards got made because of David Fincher. You need an experienced, maybe you are, but you need an experienced filmmaker or potential piece of talent attached for some of those premium services, I think, to get really interested in putting up that kind of money.
We have a last question, and then we'll have to think. Do you have a question, sir, or are you fine? Okay. Well, I want to thank the panelists. They're very busy people, but they gave us a lot today. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for the audience for asking great questions and being very attentive. Thank you very much. Bon appétit.